This is Tap Titans 2. Looks like a pretty standard idle game, right? You could have the screen, kill the big bad boys, get gold, level up heroes. What more could you want? A relic system maybe? Because BAM! It has that too. This game is actually pretty complex in a lot of ways. Spells will drastically increase your damage or gold outputs by literal thousands of times, and these little winged pet things will add a variety of boosts to things like mana regeneration or how fast you can skip stages while offline. And the equipment is way more than just cosmetic, since they'll provide individual boosts to pretty much every stat and then set bonuses for completing sets. Even leveling up heroes is interesting because the most recent one isn't always the most powerful. Mage heroes will start off weak but receive increasing boosts of power that make them really strong really fast. Archer heroes get constant middling boosts, but they get massive power increases every 1,000 levels or so. And warrior heroes? Well, they're pretty much useless unless you just unlock them, so you might not want to even bother with them most of the time. The real focus of Tap Titans 2 though is its skill tree. Like, look at how cool this is. I haven't seen an idle game before that lets you specialize in 4 completely different styles of play. I run a Shadow Clone build, which is considered the laziest active build since it basically is just me tapping my spells every couple of minutes and then just dealing massive damage. It relies on having your spells pretty much perma-activated from the spell duration increase that you get while the clone is active, and as for damage, it comes from the spell tapping the screen 30 times a second for me, so any boost of tap damage will benefit me too, which is something that it has over the clanship build. But since I'm lazy, I also develop my style pretty differently than other Shadow Clone players, since I invest heavily into inactive sneak count. Basically, I set my build up in such a way that lets me get to 99% of my max stage after a few hours of being away, and I essentially just get extra offline relic generation that I can use for sweet artifact upgrades. There's also a huge social component to this game too. Early on, you're pushed into joining a clan, which gives you access to both a clanship and, more importantly, raids. Raids provide a ton of rewards, most notably being raid cards and dust. Spending dust on leveling your cards not only lets you do better in raids, but also lets you upgrade talents that provide you with a lot of quality of life effects, like reducing the number of titans that appear per stage, or increasing the amount of titans that you can kill using overkill damage. But once you start getting into raids that require your entire clan to complete, you start to earn the very rare and valuable hero scrolls, which increase the boosts gained from all your hero upgrades, including mana capacity and regeneration, all types of damage and gold, and increased probabilities for various things. Twice a week, tournaments are held where players at around the same potential for progression are placed together to see who can push their max stage the farthest, technically making this a competitive idle game. Everyone is encouraged to join tournaments not just for the rewards, but also for various boosts that can make pushing easier for the duration of the tourney. So, tournaments sound great, right? Well, not really. Tournaments are actually where the problems in this game start to show. During a tournament, you're placed with up to 49 other players all at a similar max stage and potential for progression, usually calculated in some combination of total pet levels, total artifacts owned, etc, etc. Common advice for newer players is that they should prepare for tournaments by saving a couple prestiges worth of relics to spend the day of, since that tricks the algorithm into giving you an advantage. And you want that advantage too, since the rewards for placing high are absurdly good, usually around $10 of premium currency and a lot of specific important items that can drastically affect long-term progression. But here's the thing, prestiges take a long time, and to get to the amount recommended will probably take days of playing a couple hours each day, unless you invest heavily into offline progression like I did, which, spoiler alert, nobody does. So what ends up happening is that new players will spend days preparing for tournaments, only to find out that they got beat by someone who just purchased additional progression using real-world money after joining, giving them access to the same or potentially even more stages than would have otherwise been possible with grinding. Your only hope at that point would just be to pay up or get beat, plain and simple. So that's it, huh? Free-to-play game is pay to win and therefore bad, case closed. Well, not exactly, because everything I said at the beginning of the video about the foundation of this game is still true, and I don't technically have to join tournaments or even place high in them to continue to progress. But even when I'm not in tournaments, I still have this feeling like I'm not enjoying this as much as some other idlers like Paperclips.io, Candybox2, or hell, even Cookie Clicker. And honestly, I'm not so sure that the people who actually spend money on this game enjoy playing it either. Part 1. Wait, people spend money on this game? Usually when you think of a mobile game that makes a ton of money, you might think of something like Fate Grand Order or Fire Emblem Heroes, or any other big anime badonka PNG dispensing machine with some notion of RPG elements. But in those games, it makes sense why people are spending money on the game. It's for the honka honka. And if it's not for the honka, then it's at least for some character they like or share a connection to. But Tap Titans 2 doesn't have this. Like, sure, you can get equipment to change your character's appearance, and the pets are nice, but neither has any relevance beyond a name and a cool design, and it's hard to form a connection out of just that. Plus, these things don't come cheap either. If you wanted to remove ads, then you're gonna have to spend $50 in total of in-app purchases, which is already insane considering that at a certain point, watching ads are basically mandatory for progression. The VIP status is worse, since not only does it cost $100, but all it gets you is reduced salvaging and skill tree reset costs, in addition to a cool avatar that you can show off to other people. And if you invest $100, why not spend more? Most people who have actually beaten this game by reaching the max stage limit have spent upwards of $1,000 to get there, and I don't think you or I would spend $1,000 on a game like this, especially considering how many other better quality games that much money could get you. Clearly, something is going on here. Part 2. Live Operations. Kristen Cox is a director of live operations at Xbox Game Studios and has worked on some pretty high-profile games like Guild Wars 2. She describes live operations, or live ops, as the process and design behind taking care of games over time. In non-dictionary speak, this translates to whenever you design a live ops game, you design it as a game that is meant to receive continuous updates and maintenance based on player feedback. Her own personal design principles and what differentiates live ops games from other games as a service models is that 1. The game must have a solid core that can be built upon, and 2. All feature updates and iterations on that core design provide entirely new content to the player rather than reskinned versions of existing content. On that second point, adding a 5th big bonka waifu character that's identical to the other 4 in every way except it's been power crept doesn't count as new content. New content involves shaking the gameplay up in some major way, usually in the addition of a new mechanic or game mode. This new content should also be dictated by player feedback, taking into account what the player base tends to enjoy and fixing any problems you didn't foresee during the initial design process. And honestly, live ops games sound really interesting to design for based on what Kristen said about it in her own experience. In Guild Wars 2, she quickly found that the players with the highest retention time, as in the players who spent the most time playing the game, and the players who generated the highest ARPU, or average revenue per user, were the ones who spent the most amount of time in town compared to everyone else. These townies, as she called them, didn't really care much about the core gameplay loop, which seems weird since you'd think that that would be the main point of playing Guild Wars 2. That is, of course, until you think about why these players were spending so much time in town in the first place, which was because they enjoyed socializing with the other players there as they were going along with their days. Once the team realized the social connection was integral to the experience for these top-grossing players, they gradually incorporated more and more social aspects into the core gameplay itself. My personal favorite example of this was a phenomenon the team noticed where groups of dozens of players would travel along the world map and kill champions within a matter of seconds due to their sheer amount of combined DPS. Basically, they were having a blast. And instead of rebalancing the game to counteract these unintended champion trains as they came to be called, Kristen's team decided to let players have their fun and lean hard into them for the next update. The next map they created timed champion respawns and set champion locations in such a way that allowed for a better flow of champion trains, all while keeping them away from the central region where newer players who weren't as interested would be playing. These large group styles of combat even led to an entirely new raid boss archetype being formed that required dozens of players working together to take down, which is something that never would have been added in the first place had this not been a live ops game. So clearly this style of games as a service design has its merits and seems to be great, but why am I telling you this? Well, it turns out this type of design is what Top Titans 2 uses. GameHive, Top Titan 2's developers, are pretty active and engaging with the players who play their game and regularly listen to player feedback and aren't afraid to drastically change entire aspects of their game if it'll mean a better overall experience. I remember I was playing when the Rogue Tree got a massive overhaul. The update added at least 2 new active skills and daggers that you could tap to deal massive crit damage, and the Forbidden Contract, which let you trade all your mana for increased damage over time. And even though these 2 skills aren't widely used today, they were still different enough to be interesting and came accompanied with a lot of extra changes that both made the rogue section of the skill tree not a complete joke and improved the overall flow of the game as a whole. But here's the thing about updates for games like these in general. While the new content is great and all, the underlying motive for these is primarily increasing player retention and ARPU, or in other words, increasing the amount of money that you can get from players. The Guild Wars updates were good, but the only reason they decided to go for the social aspect was because they saw that social players were the ones most likely to spend large amounts of time and money on the game. And listen, games have to make money somehow, feed the developers, whatever. I'm not going to criticize anyone for wanting to do that, especially since I'm an aspiring game developer myself. But I do think that the 2 known financial models that work well for games are interesting to discuss. And for the record, the terminology I'll be using comes from Vladimir Krelskinov's talk on his monetization strategies for his robot gacha game, War Robots. The first model is called the hype model. Basically, your marketing team works to gain large amounts of interest for when launch day hits to maximize the huge spike in sales during the first week. Usually after the first week, most of the people who want your game have gotten it, and any future profit is marginal and usually comes from discounts or DLC releases. We observed this model for games being sold as a standalone and completed product, think something like Hollow Knight or the latest Zelda release. The other model is the value growth model, and what all games as a service type games strive for, since its potentials for earning far exceed what most hype model games are able to achieve. Value growth model games seek to start out with humble beginnings, but then grow from an increasingly large player base who you ideally want to play for long periods of time, usually months or even years. Naturally, this will lead to low attrition rates among a smaller but increasing number of players, which ideally leads to those dedicated players being willing to spend more money on the game. Since these players will spend money and will play for long periods of time, the game's profit is relatively stable, and the daily profits will eventually add up to a lifetime revenue that's greater than what a company could have gotten by releasing a completed game. This model encompasses most mobile games, but also MMOs or MOBAs or any other game that falls under a games as a service model. These two models are purely financial in nature, but games will necessarily have their design influenced immensely by the revenue model that the company is trying to go for, and this is especially true in the value growth model's case. I'd actually argue that any game created with the value growth model in mind will be inherently more toxic than a hype model game. The main issue lies in that the value growth model games have to give you an incentive to keep coming back and playing, not only to engage with the game, but also turn it into a lifestyle, so it'll be the first thing you think of in the morning and the last thing you think of before going to bed. Literally, an unfulfillable need will be created by the game, and I think Mr. Robot Gotcha Man explains this well.
Basically, value growth model, it is a bit trickier to design these kind of features, because it is about designing needs that are impossible to fulfill in the game. They should be continuous, and it is like the very basic human needs, like the need for food, for sleep, for sex, all that stuff.
The goal of Tap Titans 2 is the stage limit, currently sitting somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000, though it does tend to get increased once enough people hit it. But obviously, as it keeps getting increased, less and less players will actually be able to reach it, even though getting there is the entire point of the game. If you're there currently, you've likely either been playing since the game got released or spent upwards of hundreds of dollars to remove barriers to progression. And as long as Tap Titans 2 receives updates, it has to stay this way, because if everyone can suddenly reach the stage limit, then they can finally feel the cathartic sense of beating the game and are able to move on with their lives. But robbing them of that keeps them here, and it keeps them playing, and more importantly, it keeps them spending. Part 3. Ethics. Developers are well aware of how easy it is to get players to spend money on their games once they have them hooked. Let's look at War Robots, shall we? Robot Gotcha Hell has specific algorithms designed to look for what robot parts players are missing to finish their favorite robots, and then a tailor makes offers that match each player's quote-unquote needs. But this offer isn't just presented to the players, because the algorithm also finds what they don't need and won't ever buy, so it can sandwich the good offers between the garbage ones. Unsurprisingly, this leads to FOMO taking over when players see that one speck of gold in the dirt, and robot part special offer sales go way up. Oh, and Tap Titans 2 does this too, by the way, though it's much less sinister about it. Instead of robot parts, it tries to sell you equipment sets after you get legendary pieces, and usually these end in a few hours, so there's a time pressure component to it too. Who knows how long it'll take before you can get that equipment set again, better buy it now just to be safe type of thing. Milestone offers get suggested after reaching a certain stage and are presented as a reward for making it far. Though it is a reward you have to shell out a couple bucks for, and they're quite pricey, so you can actually probably get close to affording VIP in no time if you decide to buy all of them. So corporations are knowingly using shady and manipulative practices designed to sell us virtual overpriced goods, and selling these goods is easier to get away with in revenue growth model games since you've already gotten players invested. Corporations usually exist to make a profit and not much else too, so these practices will be encouraged by the market and will thus continue unless we add some sort of regulations to protect players. Even presumed good developers who still care about the quality of their games will also be incentivized to do this too. And by how things like Tap Titans 2 and even Guild Wars 2 have been designed, it's evident that they have already done this. And who can blame them? They're clearly racking in the big bucks, getting that cash money, if you will. But with the way these games are set up, it's questionable whether the player base themselves are actually happy playing the game. It's not difficult to find posts on Reddit about Tap Titans 2 players who are quitting the game after reaching max stage with years of their lives and hundreds of dollars invested, because it's become more like a job or a chore rather than something that they can use to unwind. And it would be easy enough to just say that this is the sunk cost fallacy in action, But if we just say that time and money were the only reasons players were willing to get blueballed by an in-game promise over and over for years, then we'd be missing out on the full picture. Leaving Top Titans 2 is difficult, and the biggest reason I've seen cited for this is because people are attached to the communities they've built around the game. Whether it's a clan Discord server or the entire subreddit community, social aspects are probably the most important part of a live service game. If you look at the top grossing games of 2017 and 2018, you find that not only are all of them live service games, but they also have huge social aspects to them that are usually integral to the gameplay itself. Just look at League of Legends on here, a game people don't enjoy playing so much to the point where it's become a joke. When I asked a friend of mine about it, she told me that I shouldn't play it, but if I did want to play it, then I should play it with her. She then told me that she continues to play mostly because it gives her something to do with members of her friend group, making League more of a social experience than anything else. But is this an okay thing to do? Letting players form a community for a game that they play to the point of exhaustion, and then keeping them going with content updates that won't really do much to help ease the burnout. All of this in an effort to get people playing your game longer than they would have otherwise? Well, I don't really think it's okay. As an aspiring game designer, I understand both the feelings of wanting people to play your game and wanting to be able to make a living off of that. But when you have a game that really only has a couple dozen hours of content being stretched into the hundreds or thousands just to get people to spend more money on it than they otherwise would have, then have you really made a good game? Or have you created a well-designed trap that uses human connection as bait? I'm not exactly immune to this trap either, by the way, as it's one that I've actually fallen into in the past. Back when I was playing Fire Emblem Heroes, I didn't just play because I thought Lucas was cute, which I mean, he is, look at him. But I also played because I had friends who played it with me, and I was the reason that they played longer than they would have, since it gave us something to talk about and enjoy together. And what happened after we all stopped playing? Well, we moved on and stopped talking as much. Part 4. Alternative models. So now that I've gone over everything, what are the alternative models that are best for us, the gamers, when it comes to things like live operations and free-to-play games? My personal favorite for free-to-play games is the extended free trial type of play, where you can technically play the game for as long as you want, and in some cases you can even finish it, but there will be a lot of barriers to progression in place to slow you down. This is what Pokemon Rumble World does, since you only have to pay $30 in microtransactions to unlock the entire game and infinite premium currency. The game obviously didn't make a lot of money doing it this way though, especially since it A. didn't receive continuous updates to make it count as a live operations game, and B. had a spending limit of $30 per player, and no free-to-play game designer in their right mind would ever set a spending limit that low or give you that much content for the price of a decent 3DS game. But spending limits in general are a good idea to put in place. Pokemon Masters, the latest endeavor in the Pokemon free-to-play marketplace, has a spending limit of around $60 per month for any account linked to a child, which I think is an unequivocally good idea that every game with microtransactions should add effective immediately. But the thing about spending limits is that they're a tough sell for a lot of companies, since most live ops games do rely on whales for a large amount of their profit, and as has already been explained, most corporations don't want to sacrifice their profit for the sake of morals. But I still think that for smaller companies who are willing to forgo some profits, I can see an incentive to do a hybrid style between extended free trials and microtransactions, where a player can buy a full game for however much it would cost on PC or console, with an added whale option. Clearly this model works too, since this is what Among Us uses, where you can play for free with ads, pay to remove those ads, and then pay more for optional cosmetics. And Top Titans 2 was almost there with that, but skippable ads and reduced salvaging costs alone aren't worth the $50 to $100 investment that they're asking for. Especially since even after spending that much money, there's no chance that anyone could come close to actually beating the game without spending even more. And it's for this reason that I'm uninstalling Top Titans 2, right now actually, because once I realized that I'm never going to beat it, I sort of lost all my enjoyment playing it, especially since I never got too heavily involved in the social aspects. If community is important to you, there are other healthier ways to find it. If you like talking about updates or news for media, then TV shows, podcasts, or other online series are still being released on weekly schedules, and you can almost certainly find fandoms for them online. Hell, there's even a Minecraft YouTuber lore community, and I have no idea what's going on most of the time on that side of the internet, but all my friends who are in it are having a blast, so there must be something there. Even games that don't get constant updates usually have strong followings, especially if it's moddable, and there are usually a lot of people who you can meet online who are still willing to talk about it. Personally, I joined the competitive Pokemon scene since I like competition. Speedrunning or challenge runs in games are also popular right now, and plenty of communities get built around that. Plus, you're not incentivized to spend massive amounts of money to participate, since the games these revolve around are usually completed works in themselves. I actually did a challenge on a Pokemon Rumble Blast recently, and I'm probably now one of 10 people to have a 100% save file on it. And in the process, I met a lot of really cool people, so maybe I'll do a retrospective on that someday if I feel like it. Tap Titans 2 is one of many games that uses a live operations model in their design. Although the developers listen to player feedback and work on improving the already solid base game, player enjoyment is largely held back by design, since the best way to profit off of a game is to dangle an unachievable goal in front of players and then telling them to achieve it. This lifestyle is most effectively held up through social connections and community that the game builds within it to trap players into continuing to play to or past the point of burnout. The result is that people aren't really enjoying the game anymore and have a difficult time stopping, all the while spending ever-increasing amounts of money on it. But it's unlikely that anything will change unless regulations are implemented, because more ethical models for players have a more difficult time being profitable. If you want to avoid falling victim to the more predatory models, try to get out before you get trapped, or find communities that aren't centered around something being sold as a lifestyle. And don't install Tap Titans 2. Anyways, this has been Adrian. Do the like, the comment, the subscribe, whatever you want to do. And remember that I love you, especially Andy, and peace out.